During the late 18th century in France, the French Revolution was stirring. The country was ruled by Louis XVI, but the majority of citizens were not happy with the outdated government in France. The ancient social classes were still in play, called the estates. These were the nobles, the clergy, and the middle class. The last estate was significantly larger, consisting of about 95% of the population. This was also the estate with the least amount of power, land, and money in France. The country was in great debt because they had come out of the 7 Years' War, which ended in 1763, with tremendous debt to other countries that they had borrowed from. They also used a large amount of money to finance the excessive spending on luxuries in the government. The French Revolution was caused by the flawed infrastructure and long-standing traditions of the government that became too much to bear for the citizens. The abnormal balance of wealth in France in the 1700s was clearly visible in the way the nobles and clergy spent their time. The country was nosediving deeper and deeper into debt, but they continued their lavish spending. The Third Estate taxpayers took the hurdle when the ruling family wanted to spend. Marie Antoinette, the Queen of France at the time, was one of the scapegoats for this frivolous spending, and not wrongfully. She spent lots of money on clothes and other unnecessary items so that she could be a trendsetter. Another setback for the middle class was that the rift between the estates had grown so wide and deep over time that no one could cross. Choice government jobs were held only for nobles, while some more deserving citizens in the Third Estate were overlooked. There was no way to move up in the classes of society because the nobles had a monopoly on the better-paying jobs. In time, this series of financial crises resulted in the spark to begin the revolution. The king nervously watched the pot about to boil over, and he came up with a plan. He invited the three estates to the Estates General in 1789, which was a meeting of the classes to discuss and vote on grievances. An Estates General had not been called for many years, so this was a bold move on his part. The nobles and clergy desperately wanted the society to stay the same, and they were afraid of the middle class. They wanted to keep the money in their control, and they did not want more power to be given to the middle class. Luckily for them, it seemed like this meeting would go their way. Each class got one vote, and since the nobles and clergy always voted together, they could overrule the Third Estate without much trouble. They shut down things like taxation of all the estates and more education for the middle class, because these would be a threat to their rule. Finally, the Third Estate had had enough and made a plan of their own. The middle class retaliated with their own plan for government, the National Assembly. The agreement to the plan happened in a tennis court, so it was called the Tennis Court Oath. The middle class wanted a more equal say for the people on how government should be run and were determined to pass a new constitution. The king, afraid of how much support they would get and the sheer number of people that would stand behind these representatives, agreed to get on board with this new system. He encouraged nobles and clergy to join as well, though not all of them agreed so readily. One thing they implemented in their constitution was abolishing the feudal obligations of the farmers who still owed to the nobles debts from years past. This was a law that they were hoping would stifle the violent acts committed by the farmers who thought the way to get rid of their debts was to burn the feudal documents, and along with them, the houses of the nobles they resided in. The new rules implemented did not make everyone happy by a long shot. The leaders misunderstood the needs of their people, and everywhere they turned, someone was upset. The turmoil that spread through France after these events was the meat of the revolution, but the causes were still in the hearts of many. They wanted a new order that made sense for the time period, so they could escape the suffering that was directly caused by their stagnant government.